I've always believed in family first. That's not just something I said to sound good, it was something I lived by. My dad made sure of that. He taught us that when things fall apart, family is what you lean on. So when he passed, I didn't even question my role. I figured I'd be helping plan the service. Like I always did. Flowers, music, the food after, it was second nature to me. I had a folder already in my mind. But as the days rolled by, nothing came. No calls, no texts, not even a mention of what was happening. I told myself maybe people were just grieving differently. Maybe they were overwhelmed. I called Kaya, my sister, thinking she'd fill me in. Her voice was oddly casual. "Oh, everything's already been taken care of," she said, like I was late to a dinner party. Not the funeral of the man who raised us. I hung up, staring at the wall, wondering when I'd started feeling invisible. That day, I realized something. People don't need a coffin to bury you. Can someone bury you before you're even dead? The funeral happened without me. Not by accident, not because I missed a text, but because I wasn't invited. I didn't know the time. I didn't know the place. I found out through a Facebook post. My cousin Sherry tagged a blurry picture with, "Rip Uncle Ron. Beautiful service." Beautiful service? My eyes stayed fixed on the screen. In the background, Kaya stood near the casket, holding hands with her husband, Wyatt, my brother-in-law, the one who used to say I was the real glue of the family. I stared, waiting for some twist, like maybe this was a memory, or maybe it was a wake for someone else. But the caption confirmed it. My dad's funeral had come and gone, and I hadn't been there. The silence on my phone was louder than anything I'd heard in weeks. No messages, no missed calls, just a blank screen, and an even blanker space in my chest. I kept wondering, was it punishment? A mistake? Or did they actually mean to keep me away? I thought about Wyatt, the one person I believed would have made sure I was in the loop. He and I weren't blood, but we'd been close. When my mom passed, he sat with me in the hospital for hours. When my car broke down on the side of 281, he was the first to pull up. But this time? Nothing. I checked my email, my messages, scrolled through old threads. I searched like someone who'd lost her keys. But what I was really hoping to find was proof that I still mattered to them. I didn't. I had been erased. And just when I thought the air couldn't feel any colder, it did. Scrolling through Facebook a few days later, I saw a photo that hit me harder than anything else that week. Wyatt and his parents standing at the Charles de Gaulle airport in Paris. Smiling. Caption: much needed escape with family after a tough week. Champagne glasses, croissants, laughter. No black, no mention of dad, no grief, just joy. They didn't just skip inviting me. They skipped the whole thing. That wasn't a family in mourning. That was a vacation. I felt my throat tighten. My hand froze on the screen. My heart didn't break, it snapped. So they skipped the funeral, for Paris? The insult wasn't in the trip. It was in the timing. The message, the deliberate nature of it all. They didn't just grieve differently. They erased me from the script, as if I'd been an inconvenience to their image of what grief was supposed to look like. And then came the comment. Buried under the likes and emojis. Someone wrote under the Paris photo. Weren't you supposed to be at the service? I paused. The reply came fast. She wasn't needed. Those 3 words, not a full sentence, just a slice of dismissal. Served cold. Wasn't needed. I buried my father in my heart every single day since he passed. I spoke to him in the quiet moments. I lit a candle for him on his birthday. But somehow, they decided I wasn't necessary. Not just to the funeral. To the family. My house had never felt that still. I could hear the ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway, each second dragging. Louder than the one before. Silence used to be comfort. A place I'd go to think. To breathe. To stitch myself back together after something painful. But this wasn't that kind of silence. This one wasn't mine. I sat on the edge of the sofa, still in the clothes I'd worn the day before. The TV was off. The curtains half drawn. There was a smell of something sour in the sink. But I couldn't bring myself to care. I just kept staring at that Paris photo, Wyatt and his parents, smiling like the world had finally tilted their way. Dad used to warn me about this habit. Silence doesn't protect you, he'd say. It just hides your pain from the wrong people. I used to argue. I thought staying quiet was safer than letting the world see how badly I was bleeding. But now, I wasn't even sure what part of me was left to hide. I played that image over and over, like it held a message I hadn't caught yet. I wasn't angry at Wyatt. Not fully. My gut told me the strings were being pulled elsewhere. Marlene. She always had a way of nudging things in directions that looked like accidents. The type who smiled while twisting the knife. So I sat there, torn. Do I call Kaya? Dig up something I might not be ready to face? Or do I let it rot? I called. At first, her voice was bright, too bright, the kind people use when they've rehearsed how they want to sound. Hey, Norel, she said, didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I didn't bite. You got a minute? Sure, she replied. Everything okay? No, I said, not even close. There was a beat of silence before she answered. Look, if this is about the funeral. It is, I cut in. I need to know, why wasn't I told? She hesitated, then gave me that polished line. The one that wasn't hers. We figured it would be too emotional for you. Too much. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was such a terrible lie. So you uninvited me from our father's funeral for my own good? Her voice cracked. It wasn't like that. Then how was it? You always make things about yourself, she said, softly. Marlene didn't want drama, and honestly, neither did I. There it was. Not just the exclusion, but the excuse behind it. I wasn't a grieving daughter in their eyes. I was a risk. A variable they didn't want to manage. Do you hear yourself? I asked. You buried him without me. You sat through his eulogy knowing I was home, waiting for someone to call. I didn't know how to fix it, she said. You didn't try. There was nothing else to say. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. But even then, the words she'd chosen clung to me like smoke. You make things about yourself. No, Kaya, you made a decision. You, Marlene, whoever else sat in that little committee. You decided who belonged, and I didn't. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door. The park was just a few blocks away. Windy, overcast, a few kids scattered near the swings. I sat down on a bench and stared at nothing for a while. I remembered sitting on this same bench years ago. When I was 16, Dad was next to me, sipping lukewarm coffee. I was crying over something. I don't remember what now, but I remember what he said. Family protects, even when it's hard. I wondered if he'd still believe that now, or if he'd look at what we'd become and shake his head. As I sat there, the past drifted in. I could see Kaya, maybe 8 years old, swinging back and forth, calling my name. I used to push her for hours, always catching her when she leaned too far. We were sisters. We were supposed to matter to each other. A buzz in my pocket broke the thought. A message from Ellie, my cousin. Hey, just saw this. Thought you might want it. Attached was a link to a private photo album, Langford Legacy. I clicked. There he was, Dad, sitting on a lawn chair, laughing, surrounded by Marlene's parents, her cousins, a grill smoking in the background. They were all there. The timestamp said it all. 1 week before he passed. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. He was with them, not me, not us. I hadn't even known he was visiting. Ellie texted again. We all assumed you already knew. That sentence sliced something open in me. Assumed. They assumed I was included. They assumed I was told. They assumed I mattered. But assumptions erase people. They turn flesh and blood into ghosts. And that's what I'd become. I walked home in a fog. By the time I reached my porch, the light had changed. Evening was creeping in. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled up the photo again, and zoomed in. Dad's eyes. I stared into them like they'd give me an answer. But all I could do was whisper. More to myself than to him. What did they tell you about me, Dad? The next morning, I woke up with that same pressure in my chest. The kind that makes breathing feel like a choice instead of an instinct. The sun was pushing through the blinds, catching dust in the air. I hadn't really slept. My mind kept circling the same thought. What did they tell you about me? Dad? I walked to my desk. The one that still smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. My laptop screen blinked awake as I moved the mouse. And there it was. An unread email. The subject line read, "For your father's files. Read before midnight." No sender name. No signature. Just that single sentence. For a long minute, I just stared at it. It felt like a trap. Or maybe a lifeline. My father used to warn me about people who deliver truth in secret packages. If it has to be hidden, he'd say, it's probably dangerous, or important. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked the attachment. It downloaded fast. A folder named Henshaw_last. The name hit like a pulse. I could hear Dad's voice in my head again. Don't let paperwork bury me before I'm gone. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. The grief that had been fog in my brain started turning into something else, cold focus. Inside the folder were files, videos, PDFs, scanned documents, a mess of data that felt too deliberate to be random. And then I saw it. A contract. Dated 3 months before he died. My father's name at the bottom. His handwriting shaky, uneven. I opened it. The words blurred for a moment. Then sharpened. Transfer of primary property holdings to Portia Langford and Silas Langford. My pulse spiked. Everything, his house, the lake property, even the insurance policies, was signed over. Not a mention of me. Not a trace of my name. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall. The betrayal didn't come in waves this time. It came like a knife drawn slow, deliberate. I whispered, Dad never told me. Did he even know what he was signing? My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. I wasn't that kind of broken anymore. Scrolling further, I found another file. Final_will_Henshaw_signed.pdf. I clicked. Line by line, the document unfolded itself. Portia, Silas, charitable funds, the Langford Trust. But where my name should have been, there was nothing. A blank space, as if I'd never existed. That was when I remembered the last night I saw him well. He'd handed me his silver pen, the one he used for every deal, and said, "May you always choose truth over comfort." Truth, comfort, he'd chosen one for me. And yet, there was something more. A sound file inside a folder named Draft Notes. I hesitated, then hit play. His voice filled the room. Weak, fading, but unmistakable. "They said you weren't ready," he whispered. "They said you'd make it harder. I just wanted peace." I closed my eyes. My body went still. Not ready? I'd held his hand through rehab, managed his medications, sat by his hospital bed when everyone else said it was too much. And somehow, I wasn't ready? The words burned straight through the part of me that still loved him. I scrolled back up to the root of the USB. One more folder. Family_pics_archive. Inside it, just one photo. A yacht, the sun bright, my father seated between Portia's parents and Marlene's family. Wine glasses, smiles. Date, 2 weeks before his death. 2 weeks. I zoomed in on his face. He looked tired, but content, as if surrounded by a family that wasn't mine. That picture hit me harder than the will. It wasn't about property or inheritance. It was about time, his last days, and where he chose to spend them. And suddenly, every small exclusion over the years replayed themselves. The dinners I was told, you wouldn't fit in. The trips I wasn't invited to. The messages that started with, we didn't think you'd mind. I thought those were accidents. Turns out, they were rehearsals. A line from Dad floated back to me. Memory is more than what we share. It's what we're allowed to know. I finally understood it. They hadn't just left me out of a funeral. They'd been erasing me long before that. Slowly, quietly, systematically. The clock on the wall clicked over to 8:12 p.m. outside. The neighborhood was dimming into quiet. Inside, I sat in my office surrounded by evidence, contracts, photos, words that changed everything. I stared at the glowing screen. My reflection faint against the light. They weren't hiding Dad from grief. I whispered. They were hiding me from legacy. By the time I pulled up in front of Portia and Silas's house, the sun was sharp, casting shadows with edges. I sat in my car a moment, folder in my lap, watching their front door like it could blink. That house used to mean comfort. Christmases where we overcooked the ham. Sunday dinners loud enough to rattle the windows. Dad used to knock with the back of his hand, like he owned part of the rhythm of that place. Now I was knocking like a stranger. I rang once, waited, and there it was. That moment of hush inside. Like they had paused mid-conversation. Like they knew. Footsteps. A second delay too long. Then the door opened. Portia stood there with a smile you could crack with a spoon. Well, didn't expect company. I met her gaze. Kept my own face clean of emotion. I'm not company. Inside, no one moved to offer a seat. No coffee brewing. No casual small talk. Just Silas in the corner. Arms crossed. Marlene behind him like backup in a court case. I didn't wait. I walked straight into the dining room and laid the folder on the table like a dealer flipping a card. Let's skip the pretending. I'm here about Dad's estate. They didn't speak, so I flipped it open. Every page tabbed, organized, USB contents printed and labeled. I started with the contract, the one transferring everything to Portia and Silas. 3 months before he passed. Witnessed, notarized, just not disclosed. Silas scoffed. Norel, you're being emotional. Don't, I said, eyes locked on his. Don't use that word like it explains something away. He tried again. You're making this into some kind of conspiracy. I leaned forward, voice low and firm. I'm laying out facts, and facts aren't emotional. They're legal, and possibly criminal. Portia raised her voice, eyes darting around the table. There were lawyers. There was timing. We tried to call. We assumed. Assumed I'd just accept being erased? No, we thought. She stopped. Caught herself. Look, you always made things messy. Norel, we wanted peace for him. Peace, I repeated. You think this is peace? The air was turning metallic. Like heat on tin. Then Silas finally stood. Slow, deliberate. You really want to go down this road, Norel? His voice dropped a register. Sometimes the truth burns more than it heals. Portia stepped closer. We know things too. About you. About what Dad really thought in the end. I didn't blink, just reached into my bag, pulled out a small digital recorder, and placed it on the table. Perfect. Let's all go on the record. Silas backed off a step. Portia's lips pressed thin. I let the silence stretch. No one said a word. Inside, my chest was thudding, but not from fear. This time, I knew who I was, and I wasn't going to let them shake that. I gathered my papers, slow and careful, no rushing, letting them see I wasn't rattled. Silas, cool now. Tried one last jab. You don't have anything concrete. Nothing illegal. Maybe not yet, I said, but public opinion's a funny thing. Especially when the receipts are this tidy. Portia snapped. Dad wanted peace, not this circus. I didn't look at her. I just muttered as I walked out. Then maybe you shouldn't have dressed the crime in a eulogy. Outside, the sunlight hit too hard. It made everything feel fake for a second, like I'd stepped out of a stage play and the world hadn't caught up. I got to my car. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I started the engine, pulled onto the street, and just as I turned the corner, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. I hit play on speaker. A man's voice, low and strained. You don't know the whole story. Norel, meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., at the marina. I stared at the road ahead. I didn't recognize the number. But something in that voice told me, this was the piece I hadn't found yet. The bookshop was closed for the night. Chairs stacked, register locked, windows fogged from the day's last breath of customers. I sat behind the counter. Lights dimmed low, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug I hadn't touched. This place used to feel like sanctuary. Rows of old paper. Worn wood floors. Memories sealed in the smell of ink and dust. Now it felt like a museum to someone who no longer existed. I opened my laptop and stared at the file again. If you see this, It means they succeeded in hiding me, and you. Dad's voice. Weaker than I remembered it ever being. Fragile but focused. A hospital bed behind him. His face drawn. Sunken. But his eyes, those didn't fade. They burned, even from a screen. I watched it twice, then 3 more times. Every frame etched itself into me. I could feel something shift. Grief hadn't left, but betrayal had shoved its way in, dragging rage behind it, and beneath it all, the one thing I hadn't let surface until now: clarity. He hadn't meant to go quietly. He hadn't meant to leave me out. They made that happen. And he knew it. When he said, "Marita, keep the stories alive. Don't let them write you out." It wasn't metaphor. It was a warning. A mission. I sat back in the chair, staring at nothing, just the hum of the laptop filling the silence. I used to believe grief was private. But betrayal broadcasts itself. He left me something more powerful than a share of the estate. He left me the truth. On tape. And I wasn't going to bury it. I closed the laptop, stood up. Even the walls of the shop seemed colder now. Everything around me had stayed the same, but I hadn't. I wasn't that hopeful daughter waiting to be called back into the fold. I wasn't the polite sister anymore. I wasn't going to ask for anything. I was going to take back what was mine. I watched the video again, this time with a pen in hand. Took notes, paused where he said they pressured him. Marked the timestamp where his voice cracked but didn't break. He wasn't just hurt, he was scared. And that was the final cut. I grabbed the folder from under the register, every printed file. Every image, the scan of the will, the signed transfers, the yacht photo, all of it. I added a flash drive with the video. Encrypted and duplicated twice. Still, even with that weight in my hands, something in me buckled. Not fear, not yet. Just the ache of reality. I'd loved them. I really had. Even Portia, even Silas, in his arrogant, smug way. I believed that deep down. Family could fracture but not dissolve. But they didn't fracture. They erased. I sat again, staring at my reflection in the darkened storefront window. That woman looking back at me. She didn't look like someone chasing peace. She looked like someone who'd just accepted war. And still, a part of me whispered, maybe walk away, maybe keep the shop, keep the quiet, let the wounds close over. But I remembered the promise I made Dad when I was 13. He handed me his silver pen and said, "You'll always carry the torch. Marita, not the easy version, the true one." I had carried it. Now I was going to aim it. I drafted the email in 2 lines. "Let's meet tomorrow. For peace. Dad's favorite cafe. 2 p.m. Marita." Portia would see it as weakness. Silas would read it as surrender. Good. Let them underestimate me. Again. I opened a new file. Listed everything. Video timestamps. Printed exhibits. Ellery's texts about the will. Verity's notes from that last week Dad was seen. The photo from the yacht. The next day wasn't about confrontation. It was presentation. A warning shot. The courtroom begins before the judge ever shows up. I would show them their own lies. In black and white. And they'd smile through it, because that's what snakes do in the sun. I walked to the door. Flipped the lock. Outside, the air had turned. Crisp. Electric. I liked that. A little edge to cut through the fog. My assistant walked by just as I was closing up. "Heading home?" she asked, tossing her keys in her purse. "Something like that," I said, handing her the shop key. "You open tomorrow. I'll be out. Everything okay?" I paused, then smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just honest. "They're gonna hear me this time." She nodded, unsure what I meant. But I knew. I stepped out, pulled the door behind me, and whispered as the lock clicked into place. "Tomorrow they'll see me, not the sister they forgot, but the one they silenced." I pulled into the waterfront lot just after 5, decked out in the same pinstripe suit I'd worn 3 years earlier when Dad was in the hospital. Only then it had been about hope. Tonight, it felt like armor. The breeze off the Charleston Sound skated across the lot. Late afternoon sun dipping behind the event venue, casting long shadows across the boardwalk. I stayed in the driver's seat for a moment. Counted the seconds. Flicked open the folder in my lap, printed contracts. Yacht photo. That confession video loaded on the tablet. I repeated one of Dad's favorite quotes inside my head. Truth will ultimately prevail where there is pain to bring it to light. Then I exhaled. I wasn't walking into a tribute. I was walking into a reckoning. I'd seen the post earlier. Portia and Silas at Charles de Gaulle. Nothing but champagne and smiles. Caption read, "A new chapter for our Henshaw-Langford legacy." When I first saw it, my heart stalled. Then it synced again, this time with fire. They treated Dad like a brand relaunch. And me like an executive they couldn't afford. I whispered to myself, just before stepping out, you can't brand a legacy by erasing its origin. That picture clicked in my brain like a loaded pistol. Proof they weren't grief-driven. They were marketing. I pulled the key from the ignition and walked toward the building. My folder underarm. I knew what they expected. The broken sister. The defeated daughter. They were about to get the opposite. Inside the venue, I walked past the cocktail tables and hors d'oeuvres trays. The screen mounted above the stage began its slideshow. Dad's life from college to architecture firm. Sunday drives. Golden anniversaries. One by one the images of me got cropped out. A father-daughter picture at the park? Gone. My smiling face at the lake? Replaced. My reflection burned inside me like acid. I approached the coordinator. My tone quiet but firm. "Excuse me. Where's the picture of us last summer?" "At the lake house?" She shrugged. "Polite. We chose significant ones." "Sorry." I nodded slowly. The air didn't clear. It pressurized. I stood, folder in hand, turned to face the room. "Everyone quiet," I said. "This isn't a tribute. It's a tribute without recognition." My voice echoed. Eyes shifted. Portia rose then. Forced calm. "Norel, this is a celebration. Your father wouldn't want this drama." "Drama?" I said. "The only drama here is missing niece. Missing daughter. Where I was the only one left behind." She paled. I pulled out the tablet and clicked play. Dad's voice filled the hall. "If you're seeing this, they succeeded in hiding you, and me." Screens flashed. The contracts. The yacht photo. The signatures. Silence swallowed the chatter. Then I handed out packets. Timeline. Digital drive drop link. Printed proofs. I said to the gathered crowd. "Read it. Understand why I waited." I stepped off the stage. Walked out into the dusk. I left before applause. I left before pity. I drove away with the files safe. The engine humming beneath me. Just as I turned the corner, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We don't see it the way you do, yet." Then it clicked. It was Silas. My chest tightened. They thought this was over. They thought the storm had passed. But storms don't pass, they change the landscape. And tonight, I'd just redirected the wind. I woke up to pings. Not one or two, dozens. I didn't even make it to the kitchen before my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Verity's message was first. "Have you seen it? Local Chronicle. Top headline." I didn't click right away. I knew. My gut told me before my eyes did. The headline read, "Estranged daughter exploits her father's death." Below it, a photo of me at the waterfront venue, shoulders square, mouth mid-sentence, tablet in hand. The article quoted me out of context. Twisted words from Dad's confession into something grotesque. Claimed I was weaponizing grief for personal gain. Said I hijacked a memorial to push a financial narrative. I felt sick, not just because it hurt, but because it was calculated. Silas. It had his fingerprints all over it. Polished, cold, legal enough not to be slander, but nasty enough to bite. I stared out the window for a full minute, watching the sky shift from slate gray to burnt orange. Then I whispered to myself, "They just handed me the microphone." An hour later, I was driving. No plan, just movement. My hands knew the way. Even if my mind was rattling loose. I ended up at the marina. Dad's old boat still docked there. Barely touched. Wind brushed my cheeks with salt and memory. I sat on the dock. Pulled my jacket tighter. Let the silence settle in. "If they bury you in lies, dig up the truth." He said that to me once. Not during some big dramatic moment. Just a Tuesday. Back when he still saw me. I thought of Silas's smile. How he always used charm as a blade. I thought of that line he used on Dad's birthday one year. Perception is everything. And now, I knew, that was always the game. Not the truth, but the version of it they could package. I opened my phone, fingers trembling, then steadied. I drafted an email to the same journalist who published that hit piece. No ranting, no pleading, just attachments. The full video file from Dad. The trip details, screenshots, legal filings, all of it. I ended the email with 3 words. No edits needed. I sent it, and I waited. By evening, the response came. If this is real, I'll publish an update. 5 words that lifted a weight off my back. I sent everything again. Full resolution, timestamps, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was screaming into a void. The article went live by nightfall. New evidence emerges in Henshaw estate dispute. The tone? Different, balanced, honest. It didn't name names, but it pointed arrows, and the comments came fast. Strangers calling out the family's behavior. Others sharing stories of inheritance betrayals. Grief turned courtroom. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, like I'd finally exhaled. Portia called. Her voice came through like broken glass. You've ruined everything. You selfish little. I hung up. Back inside the marina office, I poured coffee into the same chipped mug Dad used for years. It still said, Henshaw and Daughters. The paint was worn, but it was there. I ran my thumb across the faded blue. And that was when it hit me. Silence wasn't grace. It was surrender, and I'd been trained to treat it like strength. Not anymore. I stood there, watching boats bob gently under the pier lights, and made a quiet vow. You wanted peace, Dad. I'll give it to you. But it won't be the kind they get to define. I'll end this war, and make sure they never start another. The night grew still, calm, almost, but it wasn't peace. It was the eye of the storm. And then, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low and clear. You don't know me, but I worked for your father. We need to talk, tonight. I didn't ask questions. I just said, where? Because I could feel it. Something was coming. The first ring came just after sunrise. I was still in my pajamas. Coffee cooling beside me. When the screen lit up, Thomas Harwood calling. Dad's old accountant. I took a deep breath and answered. The voice on the other end was low. Deliberate. Ms. Henshaw, I knew your father well. We need to meet, discreetly. It's about his true wishes. I didn't speak for a moment. I packed a blazer, grabbed my tote, and drove to the harbor. The gulls cried. The water hissed against the docks. He stood by a boathouse. Quiet and sharp. He held a sealed manila envelope and said, he made me promise you'd open it only when you were ready. I nodded. I sensed that once this envelope was opened, nothing would go back to how it was. We shook hands and parted, him disappearing into the morning mist. Me walking away with something heavy in my bag. Back home, I didn't open the envelope right away. I sat in the living room with the city lights outside the window. The envelope on my lap. After what felt like hours of thinking, I tore it open. Inside were documents, letters in Dad's handwriting, a notarized amendment to his will, and audio recordings. The files revealed he'd become suspicious of Portia and Silas toward the end. He created a trust fund, hidden, just for me, protected by legal firewalls he never disclosed. On the tape, his voice, if you're hearing this, then they've done exactly what I feared. Don't let them rewrite your story. I put my hand on the table, my fingers trembling. In that moment, the figure of my father changed. He was not someone who silently bore injustice, he was a strategist. Protecting his daughter even when he couldn't say so openly. The next morning, I made an appointment with the law firm that had handled his estate. The senior partner met me in a small conference room. Gray light filtering in. I laid out the envelope. The documents. His face shifted when he saw the amendment. After a long pause, he said, this changes everything. The new documents overrode everything else. My name was included. The trust fund existed. I had standing. I couldn't help but feel both overwhelmed and sharp, like I was holding a weapon and a lifeline at the same time. I let him do the legal talk while I listened. On the drive home, I looked at the skyline and thought, Strategy matters. I'd moved from being the silent victim to someone calculated. Ready. Later that day, I called Colleen, my mentor and colleague in the small business world. We met at a cafe overlooking the water. I slid the folder across the table. Here's what we're doing next, I said. We drafted a letter to the family. Formal review of the estate or legal action follows. I handed evidence to the journalist who covered the story. No leaks. No hype. Just the facts. Late that evening, the headline dropped. New will surfaces in Henshaw estate battle. Comments exploded. Victims of family betrayal. Conversations about inheritance justice. Portia's call came. You're playing with fire, she said. I ended the call. The difference this time? I didn't shake. I didn't plead. I hung up. I was calm. Powerful. The night air was crisp when I stepped outside. I felt the calm thrum of something new under my skin. Control. When I finally tucked the documents in my safe, my phone pinged with a text from Thomas Harwood. There's one more thing he didn't want on paper. Meet me tonight. It's about Silas. The envelope in my hand felt heavier. I stared at the ceiling. The legacy? It wasn't finished. The quiet protection Dad built was evolving into a full reckoning. I closed my eyes and whispered, your silence was just the beginning. Tonight I carry on your fight. I got to the shop before sunrise. The back room smelled like dust and old books. Just the way Dad left it. I carried two things with me, his silver pen and the sealed legacy file. It felt heavier than it should have. Not in weight, but in meaning. For a long time, I thought home was just a place that lets you in. Turns out, it's the place where you stop asking and start claiming. I laid the file down on the table, untied the ribbon, and opened it. The edges were worn from how many times I'd held it without daring to look. I flipped through every page, the trust, the omitted assets, the letters he meant for me but never sent. And then I closed it, breathed deep, and stepped outside. The grass was still wet, dew hanging to the soles of my shoes. Dad's headstone looked the same, simple, clean, dignified. I crouched down beside it and placed the pen right at the base. I'm not burying you again, Dad, I whispered. I'm defending you. I stood there a moment longer, letting the wind settle around me. Then I turned and walked back to the shop. Later that morning, I sat at the counter with my laptop open. I uploaded a short video. No dramatics, just the facts, his voice in that confession, the financial documents, the image of the yacht that never should have been hidden. On the screen, in white text, this is for the one they tried to erase. I didn't need to speak. The truth spoke for itself. The views climbed. I didn't expect it to spread like that. Messages came flooding in. People I'd never met, sharing their own stories. Some had been cut out of wills. Others silenced by their own families. But most didn't want revenge. They just wanted to be seen. One comment stood out. Your voice matters when they try to silence you. I sat with that for a while. Let it soak in. The tears that came weren't bitter. They were clean, steady, like rinsing something out that had sat too long. I realized then, I wasn't looking for an apology. I was reclaiming space. The space they took. The silence they expected. I wasn't her anymore, the silent daughter. I deleted that folder. Literally, watched it vanish from my desktop like she never existed. Truth, not vengeance, was my fuel now. The next call came around noon. Portia's assistant. She'd like to apologize face to face. He said, I'll do it, but here, my shop. When she walked into the reading room, she was dressed for a press conference. Hair perfect, smile controlled, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. She sat across from me, crossed her legs, tried to set the tone. Marita, I wanted to. I cut her off and held up the pen. This, I said, was given to me. You ignored it. She blinked, didn't know where to look. I laid out the file, page by page, the secret trust, the amended documents, the omissions, the press briefings that quietly cut me out. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came. Then Silas stepped in from the hallway, suit a little rumpled. For once, he looked unsure. But the room had already decided. The weight had shifted. Portia cleared her throat. Your father wanted peace. I looked straight at her. He wanted justice. That's what I'm doing. She nodded once, Not in agreement, but in defeat. They both left quietly. No outbursts, no promises, just silence. And somehow, that silence felt like winning. That evening, I stood by the mailbox outside my place. The sealed original will addressed to Verity resting in my hand. I slid it inside and pulled the handle closed. The streetlight buzzed on overhead. I looked up at it and remembered all those nights I stood right there, hoping someone would turn their head, acknowledge me, anything. But this time, I didn't feel small, or invisible. A man walking his dog passed by. He nodded. I nodded back. Simple enough. Legacy isn't what they claim, I said out loud. It's what you choose to build. I walked up to the door, turned the knob, and stepped inside. The house was still, peaceful. I leaned back against the door for a moment, letting the quiet settle in my bones. Then I looked at my desk. The penholder was empty. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not because something ended, but because I was the one who gets to write what comes next.